Hi, Judge, can we do one more final sound check?
Test, test.
Loud and clear. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the swearing-in ceremony of George Gascon as the 43rd District Attorney of Los Angeles County. We're so glad you can join us all safely from home. We'll start today with an invocation from Rabbi Sharon Brous of ICAR.
Please join me for a moment of prayer and reflection. Holy One, you who created the world and every being in it with love, hold us in your light today, as we stand in a moment full of pain and full of promise. Our bodies and our spirits are hurting. We as a city and as a nation are profoundly unwell, and it's not only coronavirus that's threatening our lives and taking our breath away. We've spent years navigating a haze of cascading crises designed to leave us feeling tired, dispirited, and stuck. For years we've been stuck in systems established to perpetuate generations of racial injustice rather than inspire us to imagine a world that centers justice, equity, and human dignity, that protects those most vulnerable, that affirms in word and deed that Black lives matter, that cultivates a moral imagination big enough to embrace us all. We've been stuck in a failed moral narrative fueled by the machinery of fear and division that ostracizes, criminalizes, and dehumanizes, when what we need is to join together and write a new narrative for a just and loving society. We've been intoxicated by the allure of radical individualism, when what we need is to affirm the deepest truth of all, that all of our liberation is tied up in one another. For years we've been stuck. But now, in the midst of this great pain, now we're blessed with new leadership, with new ideas, with a new sense of urgency, with a new commitment, not only to repair the systems and policies that are most obviously broken, but to dream daringly of what could be. It's in this context that George Gascon steps into leadership as District Attorney of Los Angeles, a man of integrity and honesty, of humility and moral clarity. God strengthen him in his commitment to hear the voices of those who've been sidelined and marginalized, to rethink what's really possible when it comes to community safety. Help him partner with people of goodwill around this city to reimagine a justice-driven reality in which all human beings live in full dignity and work with courage and compassion to build a different kind of future for us and for all of our children. The very first thing that we learn about human beings in the Hebrew Bible is that all people are created in the image of the Holy One, which means that we are all possessing of innate dignity and inestimable worth. In my Jewish tradition, we're taught that wherever a person goes, he's surrounded by a procession of angels who blow trumpets and proclaim, "Make way for the image of the Holy One." God, help us hold this vision at the forefront, not only of our theological commitments, but also our public policy. Give us the audacity to imagine and then manifest a city, a country, a world in which every single person is truly treated as an image of the Holy One, held with dignity, grace, and love. Congressman John Lewis reminded us in his final word to the American people that we are all called to answer the highest calling of our hearts and to stand up for what we truly believe in. There is so much work to be done today. God bless George Gascon and all who are invested with the charge to work for the public good with strength in the days ahead. We know that the challenges are great. Help him and help all of us be brave, stay healthy, and be blessed. And let us say, Amen.
Thank you, Rabbi Brous. And now the Pledge of Allegiance and the National Anthem from Elder Joe Paul of City of Refuge Church and Jongmin Cho of the Warren Youth Foundation.
Put your right hand over your heart. Let's begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. God bless you.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose bright stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the racket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Beautiful, thank you. And now civil rights icon Dolores Huerta with words to mark the importance of this moment.
Hi, this is Dolores Huerta, and I want to congratulate Cascon on his wonderful, wonderful victory. As the District Attorney of Los Angeles, all of the improvements that you are going to make here in Los Angeles are going to transfer to the Central Valley of California, where much of the work that you want to do is so badly needed, but also throughout the whole United States of America, and such an answer to so many people that were protesting and asking for improvements in the way that social justice is administered. So we are all there with you, and I want to say to everybody in Los Angeles, please support George Gascon in this important work that he is going to be doing, because he can't do it all by himself. He needs your support and your help to make it happen. Congratulations again, and si se puede.
And now, please welcome Judge Lucy Armendariz of the Los Angeles Superior Court to deliver remarks and swear in our new district attorney.
Judge Lucy Armendariz. Hello, I am Judge Lucy Armendariz. I am coming to you from the East LA courthouse where I preside over criminal trials. I not only sit on the bench here, but I was also born and raised here in East Los Angeles, where I attended the local public schools. For those of you who are familiar with East LA, you know that it could be a rough neighborhood, but it is a very special place. But childhood for me was hardly idyllic. When I was 8 years old, my mother was sentenced to life in prison. She's still in prison today. A life sentence means just that, for the rest of your life. Prison is not a place you want to spend any time, let alone a lifetime. I say this to remind you that when you make the wrong choices, the consequences of those actions will follow you. I was placed in foster homes from the age of 8 until I aged out at 18. I remember having caseworkers who really seemed to worry and even care about me. But even at that age, I knew they were too overwhelmed with all the cases that they had to give me any real personal attention. I also remember the judge that ordered my placement into foster care. He couldn't pronounce my last name. He seemed even busier than the caseworkers. I remember wondering if he knew I was 8 years old. That's one of the reasons that as a judge today, I always try to look everyone in the eye, and even though I don't have a lot of time with them, I try to make sure everyone feels like they had their day in court, that they were heard and treated with dignity and respect. That's why today it's my distinct honor to swear in my good friend, George Gascon, as the next district attorney for Los Angeles County. He knows that we must hold people accountable for their actions. He understands that people's choices have consequences, but he also shares in the belief of truly protecting victims. Mr. Gascon understands that ensuring communities are safe, healthy, and whole, we must be dedicated to transforming the criminal legal system so that it is more just and equitable for all people. So at this point, it is my great honor to ask Mr. Gascon to please raise his right hand. I state your name.
I, George Gascon,
During such times as I hold the office
during such time as I hold the office
of District Attorney of the County of Los Angeles,
of District Attorney of the County of Los Angeles,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States,
that I will defend and support the Constitution of the United States,
the Constitution of the State of California,
the Constitution of the State of California,
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
that I will bear true faith and allegiance
that I will bear true faith and allegiance
to the Constitution of the United States
to the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California,
and the Constitution of the State of California,
that I take this obligation freely,
that I take this obligation freely,
without any mental reservation
without any mental reservations
or purpose of evasion,
or purpose of evasion,
and that I will well and faithfully
and that I will well and faithfully
discharge the duties upon which I am about to enter.
discharge the duties upon which I'm about to enter.
Congratulations, Mr. District Attorney.
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you. Thank you. You know, I want to begin by thanking so many people. There were so many in our community that supported this from the very beginning. I want to thank my family. I want to thank my daughters, Monique and Steffi, who have been incredible rocks of support. My sons-in-law, my grandkids. My mother, Maria, who could not be here with us today, but I know that she's very proud. And my father, Marcos, who is unfortunately not here anymore with us. I want to thank my beautiful wife, Fabiola, and our boys in Mexico City, and Gloria, and all our family in Mexico as well. Gracias. Quiero darle las gracias a la comunidad y a todos aquellos que nos han apoyado durante toda esta campaña, pero durante nuestra vida. Les agradecemos profundamente su amor, su apoyo, su cariño. Y especialmente quiero darle las gracias a mi familia, a mis hijas Monique y Steffi, a sus esposos, a mis nietos, a mi mamá María, que no puede estar con nosotros aquí, pero sé que está pensando y apoyándonos. Mi papá Marco, que desafortunadamente ya no está con nosotros aquí, pero está presente en su alma. Y a mi querida esposa Fabiola, que es la roca de mi vida. A nuestros niños en México, Miguel y Santiago, y a nuestra mamá, Gloria también. Muchas gracias a todos. You know, it was 40 years ago that I walked my first beat as a young Los Angeles police officer. I still remember to this day, the first day that I put a uniform on, I was so proud. It was personal pride. I know that my family was very proud as well, much like we are today. However, I'm not the same man that I was when I first put on a uniform. And one of the many reasons for that is because of situations that I faced as a young police officer. Situations and experiences that have stayed with me for my life and that continue to shape my approach to this work. Over the course of decades in policing, I've witnessed over and over again the multi-generational impact of arrests and prosecutions in poor African American and Latino communities. Often, the offenses weren't particularly memorable, but to this day, I remember seeing their faces, recognizing last names, and instantly feeling a sense of familiarity. I probably had not met the young person before, but years earlier, his father, or perhaps an uncle or a brother, had been arrested by me or other officers working with me. To this day, those days continue to haunt me. How, with all the resources that we poured into arresting, prosecuting, and incarcerating, how did we fail multiple generations of the same families? You know, over the years I've waited how this phenomenon was visited exclusively on disadvantaged communities. But it would be years before I had an answer, and years more before I knew that I was going to do something about it. Research has shown that drug use doesn't discriminate. It's not just white people, or black people, or brown people that are addicted to drugs. America is addicted to drugs. But while America's addiction is equal across racial lines, rates of arrest, prosecution, and incarceration are anything but equal. And this well-known inequality begins at a very early age. Most kids experiment with drugs. But the painful truth is that the disadvantaged kids that get caught tend to go to juvenile hall, while kids in wealthier communities tend to go to rehab. It's not simply that this is unfair or unjust. The consequences of being involved in the justice system from a young age have compounding effect. Being arrested and having your liberty taken away can feel traumatic and dehumanizing. Add to that being put in a concrete box, and you have a potent recipe for a lifetime of involvement in criminal activities and the criminal justice system. And this is not an exaggeration, and it is not an overstatement. Fear destroys our capacity to learn, and we know that isolation activates harmful hormones in our bodies with lasting damage. It's for this reason that locking up kids has never been shown to enhance public safety, but has been shown to significantly increase a young person's likelihood of committing future offenses. Locking up kids doesn't help, it hurts. And that is why I am immediately ending the practice of charging kids as adults. You know, the myth of the child super predator and a rush to incarcerate generations of kids of color in the 1990s is just one of the many tough on crime policies that has not only failed us, but has severely backfired, costing our communities morally, economically, and tearing apart the social fabric of many of our communities, all while harming community safety. For decades, tough on crime advocates, the private prisons, the bail industry, and law enforcement unions, all organizations that profit of taking away your liberties, they sold us a false narrative that more police, stiffer penalties, and more people locked up in prison made us safer. They have, and they will continue to make this unfounded, self-serving claims in the name of victims. But you know what? They fail to actually ask victims what they want. Well, the largest network of crime survivors in the nation survey victims, thousands of them. And they found that victims prefer rehabilitating people who commit crimes over punishing them by overwhelming margins. In fact, the survey found that victims prefer investments in education, job creation, mental health treatment, at-risk youth programs, drug treatment, and community supervision over more spending on prisons and jails. And this was by overwhelming margins. We must listen to victims. Not just because this work demands that we help them on their journey from victim to survivor, but because they're right. The programs and services they want actually work to reduce crime and reduce recidivism and prevent future victimization. As usual, the persons closest to the problem are also those closest to the solution. So beginning immediately, my office will not falsely invoke victims, but we will listen to them, to protect them, to restore them. And that's why, beginning immediately, I am ending cooperation requirements for victims of crimes. Victims will no longer be required to testify in order to receive victim services. It's unconscionable that we force victims to testify against another in order to recognize their trauma and in order to give them the resources that they deserve. And because no matter what the circumstances are, anyone who loses a loved one is a survivor in my eyes, this office will immediately extend victim services to families of those killed by law enforcement. You know, the murder of George Floyd this summer was a horrific reminder that too often our profession has failed to hold its own to the same standards we impose on the communities that we are sworn to protect and to serve. George Floyd exposed the chasm between police and community, and they galvanized a generation to stand up, to speak up against a system that the public has known for too long that largely views as a two-tier system of justice. One for police officers and prosecutors, and another one for everyone else. Those in the profession of holding people accountable cannot themselves escape accountability. In order to do this work effectively and safely, police and prosecutors cannot afford to be in an adversarial posture with those that we serve. It has severely degraded our standing in the communities where we must both work and live. So over the summer, I, with the help of LAPD's first Inspector General and a former U.S. Attorney in the President Obama's Department of Justice, reviewed several traveling police uses of force cases that my predecessor declined to prosecute. These are cases where the basis for the declination was contradicted by the publicly available physical evidence. To restore faith in our guardians, I have already pledged to reopen 4 of dozens of fatal officer-involved shootings we review. But to restore the trust in the principle of equal justice in a lasting way, I am convening a use of force review board made up of policing experts, civil rights attorneys, and community members. They will review fatal uses of force cases dating back to at least 2012, and they will make recommendations to my office as to which additional cases need to be reopened. The University of California at Irvine's civil rights and criminal justice clinics have graciously agreed to support this unprecedented effort. Like myself, many senior law enforcement officials cut their teeth in the business in the 1980s and 90s. But where some of us differ is that I am convinced that we must abandon what we knew then for what we now know. Los Angeles is a poster child for the failed tough on crime approach, but we're already past 300 homicides last month. And violent crime in LA County increased nearly 30% over the last 8 years, while our incarceration rates continue to grow. The status quo hasn't made us safer. But while Los Angeles has largely resisted reform, the state of California has simultaneously seen reductions in crime rates and incarceration. So beginning today, we're instituting a series of policies based on data and science, not fear and emotion. We know that our system of money bail is as unsafe as it is unjust. The rich can be dangerous, while the poor can pose zero threat to society. How much money you have in your bank account is a terrible proxy for dangerousness. As a result, cash bail poses a serious risk to public safety. And today, there are hundreds of people languishing in jails, not because they represent a danger to our community, but because they can't afford to purchase their freedom. This weakens the connection to things that strengthens our communities. Jobs, housing, treatment, and family. And that is why my office will no longer request cash bail for any misdemeanor, non-serious, non-violent felony offenses, and defense attorneys with an in-custody defendant client that qualifies under this office policy may immediately calendar a hearing to revisit and withdraw bail from their clients. My office will not contest their release. Experts estimate that this means that hundreds of individuals behind bars today will be eligible to get their freedom back tomorrow. And this is just the first step. And by January 1, my office will roll out a plan to end money bail in Los Angeles in its entirety. We will be the largest office in the nation to eliminate cash bail. And it will reinvigorate the presumption of innocence in LA County. Today, we also know that over-incarceration, the practice of sending people to jails and prisons for too long, does not enhance public safety. In fact, it actually hurts our collective well-being. Research shows that initial incarceration prevents crime through incapacitation and is often appropriate. But that each additional sentence year causes a 4 to 7% increase in recidivism, and that eventually outweighs the incapacitation benefits. That means that excessive sentencing creates more victims in the future. Enhancements, a legacy of the tough on crime era, are the principal drivers of excessive sentencing. California has enacted over 100 sentencing enhancements, which are outdated, incoherent, and apply unfairly. And while there is no compelling evidence that enhancements improve public safety, California's mass incarceration can be tied directly to enhancements and the extreme sentencing laws of the 1990s. No more so than California in 1994 three strikes law caused this increase. In 1980, California had a prison population of roughly 23,000 people. 10 years later, after the passage of three strikes, and I correct that, 10 years later in 1990, that number grew to 94,000. And in 1999, 5 years after the passage of three strikes, California prison's population ballooned to 160,000 souls. Worse still, three strikes and the flood of enhancements that we created severely exacerbated racial disparities in our criminal justice system. Fully 45% of the people serving life sentences under the three-strike law are black, even though African Americans account for less than 6% of our total population. The amount of harm these policies have caused cannot be overstated. And it is for these reasons that my office will immediately cease filing not just gang allegations, but all enhancements and three-strike allegations. My deputies also have been directed to dismiss those alleged pending matters at their next court appearance. These policies yield no benefit to public safety. They undermine rehabilitation, they increase racial and other inequities in our justice system, and they decimate families and communities. They are also crowding jails and prisons and exacerbating the COVID pandemic behind bars. You know, the role of the district attorney is just not to correct our path by ensuring future justice, because the pursuit of justice must be timeless. And that is why we will work to correct the injustices of the past. And this is how, in a state that led the way in tough on crime, California can lead for good now and turn the tide of mass incarceration and start and you. Experts estimate that at least 20,000 people sentenced to prison from LA County are serving sentences far longer than they will receive under the charging policies I announced today. This is a whopping 1/5 of California's total prison population. According to prison evaluations, 50% of all those sentenced in LA County are rated low risk to reoffend. I repeat, low risk to reoffend. In fact, a remarkable 95% of the people who spend 20 years in prison are considered low risk to reoffend. Think about it for a moment. 95% of those that have been in prison for over 20 years are unlikely to hurt us, but they're still in prison. Because punishment must be proportional and in the community's best interest, and it must serve a rehabilitative and restorative purpose, my office will begin an unprecedented effort to reevaluate and resentence thousands of cases. Anyone serving a sentence including an enhancement or 3 strikes allegation will be eligible for reconsideration. And so is anyone that has served more than 20 years in state prison. We will prioritize cases for resentencing where people have already served excessive sentences, for people convicted of nonviolent crimes, for those deemed to be low risk for release, for people who have demonstrated the records of rehabilitation, for older prisoners who are especially at risk for COVID-19, and for people sentenced to adult prison as a child. The resentencing process will be a significant undertaking and will include input from victims and victim advocates, and the Amity Foundation, in partnership with Returning Home Well Initiative, has promised to help everyone resentenced by my office as they re-enter our community, because we all recognize that it's not enough just releasing someone. We have to provide a path for success. Taking together these policies, we will reduce our over-reliance on excessive and harmful punishment and improve sustainable public safety at the same time. It will also save California taxpayers billions of dollars. I repeat, billions. Billions of taxpayer resources that can be put back into our communities, into public health, housing, and education. The solutions that actually enhance long-term health and safety for our community. Now, when it comes to excessive sentencing, there can be no sentence more excessive than death. Racism and the death penalty in our country are inextricably intertwined. And numerous studies have found that race influences who is sentenced to die in this country. In California, this includes both the race of the defendant and the race of the victim. There are currently 215 people on California's death row who were sentenced to death in LA County. An astonishing 85% of them are people of color. This makes Los Angeles County an outlier even within the state's flawed system, as the rest of California death row population is about 59% people of color. The death penalty also serves no public safety purpose. In fact, state-sanctioned killings do not deter crime. You know, I'm a very proud Angelino, but I am appalled that Los Angeles has become the nation's death capital. Over the past 8 years, LA has put 23 individuals in death row. That is more than Georgia, Mississippi, Louisiana, Tennessee, and Virginia combined during the same period of time. The reality is that the death penalty does not make us safer. It is racist, it's morally untenable, it's irreversible and expensive. And beginning today, it's off the table in LA County. And it's not just off the table going forward. I am committed to resentencing those currently on death row to life in prison. You know, there's a saying that says, as California goes, so does the nation. And in the 1980s, our state built 23 prisons in one University of California campus. We led the nation with tough on crime and mass incarceration policies, and the nation followed. But the policies that are started here in California in the 80s and 90s came on the heels of America's defunding public education, public housing, and mental health. Instead of housing and treatment, California's solutions to many of the social problems that were health problems became a cage, a criminal justice answer. We would be foolish to think that there is no connection between the tough on crime era that California led and the Golden State's dubious standing as the nation's leading home of the homeless. We attach felony consequences to low-level behavior, and over the years, we churn out millions of people with a scarlet letter of a criminal conviction. Disproportionately poor and mentally ill people exit our system. And to this day, they are trapped in a paper prison. Their criminal conviction has cut them off from many job prospects and renders them ineligible for many types of housing. And when many of them end up on the street, homeless, we then direct our rage at the system that got us into this mess. We directed our rage and anger to the streets, to the homeless population. And we criminalize behavior largely associated with poverty. Loitering, drinking in public, public intoxication, possession of drugs and paraphernalia, and more. Turning out our public health problems into criminal problems did not serve the public interest, nor has it enhanced our quality of life. In fact, when a police officer cites someone for a quality of life offense, it generally takes months before that matter gets in front of a judge. That's months where a community quality of life may continue to be harmed, and where the individual may continue to engage in self-harm. And then, as we know, that population often fails to make it court. You know, we don't ask a bus driver to fly a commercial airplane. But the public has unfairly asked law enforcement to handle every manner of social ill facing society. It has severely complicated our profession and crippled our effectiveness in the eyes of the public. Ultimately, you can't cure cancer with a hammer, just like you can't cure mental illness, poverty, or homelessness with a cage. For this reason, my office will immediately start filing a variety of first-time misdemeanor offenses associated with poverty and mental health. And we will immediately begin the process of working with police to expand diversion into services at the first point of contact. And in the days and weeks ahead, my office will drastically increase the use of diversion to more effectively help us address the crisis on our streets. We simply cannot continue to apply criminal justice solutions to what is a public health problem. I recognize that these are big changes, but they are changes that will enable us to actually protect the truly vulnerable, victims of violent crime, sexual and domestic assault, communities facing violence because of their religion, race, or gender identity, poor neighborhoods harmed by corporate scams and pollution. That's why and most people in law enforcement signed up to protect, certainly when I first got my badge. And instead of blindly justifying tough on crime policies in their name, we can make a real change for our victims. For those of you at home who may be skeptical, I want to ask you to take a moment, maybe even close your eyes, and imagine your ideal safe neighborhood. I suspect that most of you will imagine a neighborhood with parks, playgrounds, and manicure lawns, with kids playing and after school programs flourishing. I don't believe that most of you imagine a neighborhood with a police officer in every corner. We know what safety looks like, but we don't offer it to every community equally. Today, with the help of science, data, and research, our understanding of the roots and causes of crime are much better. And what enhances safety has grown. As a result, we have become increasingly equipped to break this cycle of arrest, prosecution, and incarceration that has undermined our safety. The result is that we are increasingly capable of getting to that safe neighborhood that you and I just imagined, but we will never get there with small incremental changes. I am not the same man that I was 42 years ago when I first put on a uniform. But while my methods have changed, my law enforcement journey has always been the same. It's one about preventing crime, reducing recidivism, and restoring victims. You know, the faces of the multiple generations of sons and fathers that fell victim to the war on drugs and the tough on crime era will always haunt me. But it put me on the path that led me to be here today. I recognize that for many this is a new path. But whether you were born in LA or came to this country and to LA as a young boy like me, and whether you are a protester, a police officer, or a prosecutor, I ask you to walk with me. I ask you to join me on this journey. We can break the multi-generational cycles of violence, trauma, and arrest and recidivism that has led America to incarcerate more people than any other nation. It is this path that one day will prevent our police and our criminal justice system alike from having ever again to arrest and incarcerate the fathers and sons of the same families. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. I am so honored by your support. I am so honored by the responsibility that you bestow on me and my family. And I'm just looking forward to working together to make LA the greatest county in the country and the leader not only of criminal justice reform, but the leader in creating safe and just communities. Thank you. Muchas gracias a todos.
Congratulations, District Attorney Gascon, and thank you all for joining us today. Stay safe out there.